I was standing in front of my mother-in-law's grave, holding a sealed envelope that would change everything. Tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure rage. After 15 years of marriage, I had finally discovered why she always treated me like a stranger in my own family. What was written on that paper wasn't just a will. It was a confession that would reveal the Peterson family's biggest secret, and why my husband David never told me the truth about our house, our money, and about who I really was to them. My name is Claire, and until 3 days ago, I believed I had a solid marriage. David and I met in college, married young, and built what I thought was a comfortable life together. He worked as an accountant at a family business, and I was an art teacher at a local school. We lived in a beautiful Victorian house in the city center, a property that David always said he had inherited from the family. His mother, Margaret Peterson, was an elegant but distant woman. In 15 years, I never managed to win her approval. She would greet me with icy politeness, smile when necessary, but her eyes always carried something I couldn't decipher. "Claire, dear, could you pass the salt?" That was the kind of interaction we had at Sunday dinners. Cordial but empty. David always said, "Mom isn't very expressive, but she likes you." I wanted to believe it. I really did. Margaret passed away last Monday, victim of a sudden heart attack. They found her in her favorite armchair, with a cup of tea still warm in her hands. The wake was discreet, as she would have wanted. I was genuinely sad. After all, she was the mother of the man I loved. It was during the funeral that everything began to fall apart. The family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, approached me after the ceremony. He was a short man with thick glasses, who had known the Petersons for decades. "Claire, Margaret asked me to deliver this directly to you," he said, placing a thick envelope in my hands. "She was very specific. Only you should read it, and only after she was gone." David was on the other side of the cemetery, talking with his uncles. He didn't see the envelope changing hands. "What is this?" I asked, feeling the weight of the paper between my fingers. "I don't know. Margaret sealed it personally. She said it was important that you knew the truth." Harrison adjusted his glasses. "She mentioned something about justice, and what Claire deserves to know." My heart raced. Why would Margaret leave something specifically for me? And why in secret? I tucked the envelope into my purse, but it weighed like lead. Throughout the entire reception after the funeral, I could feel its presence. David held my hand, receiving condolences, but I could barely focus on the sympathy. What did Margaret have to tell me that she couldn't say while alive? That night, when David went to shower, I locked myself in the office and opened the envelope with trembling hands. The first page was a handwritten letter in Margaret's elegant script. "Dear Claire, if you're reading this, it means I've finally passed and can speak the truth without immediately destroying my son. For 15 years, I watched you struggle to be accepted in this family, not knowing that you were already much more a part of it than you imagined. The house where you live, it's not a Peterson family inheritance. It's yours by right. Your grandfather, Ernest Thompson, was my business partner. When he died, he left half of everything to his only granddaughter, you. But there was a problem. You were only 5 years old, and your parents died in that accident. David doesn't know. He never knew." My hands began to shake. Ernest Thompson. I vaguely remembered that name. My Aunt Linda, who raised me, mentioned a grandfather who had business, but never went into details. I thought it was just a small company. I continued reading, but the words began to blur in my vision. What Margaret was saying didn't make sense. If I inherited half of my grandfather's business, where was that inheritance? Why didn't anyone tell me? David returned from the shower and found me still holding the papers. "What's that, love?" he asked, kissing my neck. "Just some documents your mother left," I lied, quickly hiding the letter. "Nothing important." But everything was important, and I needed to discover the rest of the truth. The next morning, while David was at work, I called my Aunt Linda. She was 78, but her mind was still sharp. Linda, I need to ask about my grandfather Ernest. Do you remember his business? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Claire, dear, why are you asking about this now? Did something happen? Margaret Peterson died. She left me some papers. The Petersons. Linda's voice became tense. Claire, I tried to protect you from this whole story. Your grandfather and Margaret were partners in a real estate development company. When Ernest died, Margaret became responsible for managing your share until you turned 25. But I'm 38, Linda. What happened to the money? I don't know, dear. Margaret always said she was investing for you, that the money was safe. When you married her son, I thought that maybe she would finally do the right thing. My head was spinning. 25 years old. I should have received my inheritance 13 years ago, 3 years before I married David. I spent the rest of the week at the registry office, the public records office, and the library, putting together pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed. What I discovered left me breathless. Peterson and Thompson Development Company was one of the region's largest real estate development companies during the 80s and 90s. My grandfather Ernest owned 50% of the company. When he died, his share, valued at over $2 million at the time, should have been held in trust for me. Margaret had been named administrator of the trust, but the documents showed something disturbing. Over the years, she had gradually transferred my assets to her name and subsequently to David's. The house we lived in, bought with my inheritance money. David's car, financed with dividends that should have been mine. The Peterson family savings account, fed for decades with profits that belonged to me. I had been robbed for 15 years. And the worst part, David was using my money to support our married life, while I worked as a teacher to help with expenses. That night, I prepared a special dinner. I lit candles, opened an expensive bottle of wine, and arranged all the documents I had collected in an organized folder next to my plate. David came home smiling, kissed my forehead as he always did. Smells good. What's the occasion? He asked, loosening his tie. I just wanted to have an important conversation with you, I replied, serving the wine. About inheritance, about family, about truths. He laughed, still relaxed. You're talking just like my mother with these mysteries. Funny you should mention your mother. I opened the folder and placed the first document on the table, because she left me a very interesting letter. The color drained from David's face when he saw the header. Peterson and Thompson Development Company. Trust documents for Claire Thompson Peterson. David, my voice was calm, controlled. Did you know that half of everything we have comes from my inheritance? He swallowed hard, his fork frozen in the air. Claire, I don't know what you're talking about. You don't know. I placed another document on the table. This is the deed to our house, purchased in 2010 with funds from the Ernest Thompson Trust. My grandfather, David. My money. His hands began to tremble. David dropped his fork and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I knew well. He always did that when he was nervous. Claire, let me explain. Explain. My voice was cold as ice. Explain how you've been married to me for 15 years, using my own money to support me, while I work 40 hours a week thinking we're building a life together. He took a deep breath. I found out about the trust 3 years after we got married. Mom told me when we asked to borrow money for the kitchen renovation. She said there was a family income source that could help us. And you didn't think it was important to tell me that this family income source was literally mine? I wanted to tell you. He stood up, starting to pace around the room. But Mom said it would be better not to complicate things. That the money was being well managed. That it didn't matter where it came from. It didn't matter. I stood up too, my voice echoing through the room. David, that money was mine by right. I should have received it at 25. You don't understand, Claire. That time the money was invested, doing well. Mom thought if it mixed with the family assets, it would be better for everyone. For everyone. Or for you. I threw another document on the table. This is the company's tax return from last year. Your family made $500,000 in dividends. Dividends from my money, David. He sat heavily in the chair, his head in his hands. What do you want me to do now, Claire? The money has already been used. The company was sold last year. I can't undo 15 years of investments. Sold. My blood ran cold. You sold my part of the company. David didn't answer. He didn't need to. The guilty expression on his face said everything. I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, this is Claire Peterson. I need to know. When Peterson and Thompson was sold, what happened to my trust resources? David tried to grab the phone from my hand, but I moved away. Mrs. Peterson. The lawyer's voice sounded embarrassed. Margaret instructed me to transfer the resources to a joint account for you and David after the sale. She said you wanted to invest in your own business. A joint account that I never knew existed. Well, Margaret handled all the paperwork. David signed as your legal proxy. I hung up the phone and stared at my husband. Legal proxy, David. When did you become my attorney? He couldn't look me in the eyes. It was when you had that appendix surgery, remember? You signed some papers at the hospital. I signed medical papers, not a financial power of attorney. Claire, you were in pain on medication. Mom said they were just formalities in case we needed to access accounts during your recovery. The betrayal was so deep I could barely breathe. They had taken advantage of a moment when I was vulnerable to legally rob me. Where is the money now, David? He hesitated. David, I asked where my money is. Part was invested in an offshore account. Part is in the savings account. And part. He paused. Part was used to buy shares in the new company where I work. The company where you work. I laughed, but there was no humor in my voice. Me guess. You're not just an employee. You're a partner. The silence confirmed my suspicion. With my money, you bought part of a company and made me an employee in my own life. David finally looked me in the eyes. Claire, I know it looks bad, but... Looks bad. I gathered all the papers from the table. David, you literally stole my inheritance, forged a power of attorney, sold my assets without my knowledge, and kept me working as if I needed to contribute to household expenses. A house bought with my own money. He tried to approach, but I backed away. And you know what's worse? All these years, I felt guilty for not being able to win over your mother. I thought I wasn't good enough for the Peterson family. But the truth is she knew exactly who I was, the real owner of half of everything you had. David tried to hug me, but I pushed him away. Claire, I love you. That never changed. The money. The money doesn't matter if we have love. I looked at him, really looked. The man I had shared 15 years of my life with. The man who had slept beside me every night, knowing he was living a lie. Love, David. I grabbed my purse and car keys. You loved me so much that you preferred to rob me rather than tell me the truth. You loved me so much that you let me feel inadequate in your family for 15 years, when I was more Peterson than you would ever be. Where are you going? To a hotel. I need to think. Claire, please, we can work this out. I stopped at the door and turned around. Work it out. David, you didn't just steal my money. You stole 15 years of my life. You made me live a lie. And the worst part. My voice broke for the first time. The worst part is that I really loved you. I truly loved you. And you destroyed that. I still love you. If you loved me, you would have told me the truth 13 years ago. I spent 3 days at the hotel, talking to lawyers specializing in financial fraud. What I discovered gave me both hope and pain. Technically, I could sue David and recover most of what belonged to me. The power of attorney had been obtained fraudulently. The investments made without my knowledge could be reversed. I had a solid case. But I also discovered something else. David really didn't know everything. Margaret had manipulated the situation so that he believed he was doing the right thing for the family. He was guilty, yes, but perhaps not as malicious as I initially thought. On the fourth day, he showed up at the hotel. "Claire, I talked to my lawyers," he said, sitting in the chair across from the bed where I was. "They said you have a right to everything. More than 2 million, with interest and correction." I didn't respond. "I'm going to transfer everything back to you. The house, the shares, everything. You can sue me, you can ask for a divorce, you can do whatever you want. But first..." He took a deep breath. "I need you to know that I really didn't understand the magnitude of what my mother had done. You knew it was my money, David. I knew. But she convinced me it was being well managed, that it made no practical difference. I was young, I trusted her blindly. When I realized the situation was more serious than I thought, I was already so deep in the lie that I didn't know how to get out. I looked at him, really looked. I saw the man I loved, but I also saw the man who had lied to me for 15 years. What do you want from me now, David? A chance. A chance to do the right thing. To rebuild our life with the truth. What if I don't want to rebuild? What if 15 years of lies have destroyed any possibility of trust?" He lowered his head. "Then I'll accept it. And I'll make sure you get everything that's yours." 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of my house. Yes, my house, legally registered in my name. David had kept his promise. He transferred everything. The property, the shares, the money from offshore accounts. Even an additional amount as interest for the lost years. He moved to a small apartment on the other side of town. We talked, sometimes had dinner together, but as two acquaintances, not as husband and wife. Some friends ask me if I'm going to forgive him completely, if we're going to try again. The truth, I don't know. The money is back with me. Justice has been done. But trust? Trust is something that can't be recovered with bank transfers. Margaret was right about one thing in her letter. I deserved to know the truth. But she was wrong in thinking that protecting David from the truth was protecting our marriage. Actually, it was exactly the opposite. Sometimes I wonder how our life would have been different if they had been honest from the beginning. If David had come to me at 25 and said, "Claire, you inherited a fortune, and I want us to manage this together as a real couple." But maybe that's the hardest lesson of all. We can't redo the past. We can only decide what to do with the truth when it finally comes to light. And you? What would you have done in my place?